But welcome everyone. And Rebecca, welcome to Juneau. We're excited to talk about your moonshot today. So
Awesome.
as
Thank you for
we
having
get
me.
going, tell us a little bit about you. Where are you joining from? What do you see around you that's cool? And tell us a little bit about your background.
Great. So my name is Rebecca A. Church. I've been in the association and nonprofit space for probably 26 years. I started in 1994, 5, 6, something along those lines. And I actually started out as an event planner. And so I live in Charlotte, North Carolina now, but when I was an event planner, the funny thing is, I joked that back in the day that I said I was young enough, dumb enough, and naive enough to keep saying yes when I probably should have said no. And it was an era of some evolving technology, lots of evolving technology. We didn't have APIs. We were doing things with fax machine, and I started getting into technology. So fast forward now 20 whatever years, and I've stumbled my way through learning technology and really come at it from the human side. So now I own a consulting practice where we actually help facilitate that digital transformation for organizations. And that includes not only your internal systems, but also going hybrid and remote. So I love that we're sitting here talking about community today and what it looks like in a digital space, because I think it's such an important component of how we create connection as we all work in a new way.
Absolutely. Well, having worked in the association world for so long, you've probably seen quite the digital transformation yourself, just in the way associations work. And before we dive into AWTC, I'm curious on talk to me a little bit about your journey from events. Your last role with an association before going consulting was in tech, working with project managers and developers. So for those
100%.
that maybe are like, I'm burnt from events, myself included, I work at Juno now because I was needing a break from the event space. How did you make that jump from events into project management and tech?
I love that question. It was really learning the business, and it's funny because event managers are great project managers and great analysts, but they just do it. Their target is different. Their target is the event. So all it really took was turning that target to something else, taking those skills that I had developed as an event planner, the organization, the order of operation, which really matters in technology and in project management and implementations and digital transformation, was the sequencing of things. The downstream effect, like what happens when audio doesn't work in a room? What happens when there aren't enough seats? What happens when being able to understand the downstream effect, and frankly, understanding kind of, how you think on your feet. Technology is always evolving and always changing, just the way the meeting industry is, stating the obvious, what's happened in the last 2.5 years, but it was changing before then. And the events were changing before then, and good event players, they knew this. So we know that you have to be, as an event planner, on top of things. You have to be ahead of the curve. You've got to be forward thinking, and you have to know how to think on your feet. So all three of those things were incredibly transferable skills.
Yeah.
And so what I did was I started, again, back in the day, there were no APIs, no real integrations. Everything was done kind of by rekeying. So I took advantage and leveraged the latest technology in meetings and in events to build out the technical skills. And it was a great opportunity. So my last gig, before heading into in the association side, was working for the American Chemical Society. And there I was their program manager for their entire AMS transformation. So that was the entire evolution, to go from planning a top 100 trade show to doing trade shows within the American Chemical Society, to really to doing their AMS transformation. And it stemmed from being curious. It stemmed from having really native and natural project management skills that I formalized. And third was really knowing the business and starting from the human side versus the technical side,
Right.
which made all the difference in the world.
Absolutely. Well, in the nature of being curious, that's sort of how you came to be one of the co-founders of, I'm going to read it because I always mess up the name. I just always call it AWTC, but that is the
Just call it, yeah.
Association women in technology champions. So
Yes.
being curious and having that sort of as your guiding light for a lot of this, how did you shoot for the moon and create this organization? Like, what an accomplishment, what a crazy thing to do, what an amazing thing to do. Like, where did that come from? How were you so curious and you started it?
That's a great question. So, needless to say, women in tech have been in the space now, as I said, for many years. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't. It still is not very common, to be frank. It is still a very male dominated industry. And approximately 9 years ago, here's how it all started. Approximately 9 years ago, we were at an ASAE event, and there was a speaker, a panel that was talking about building a community, building a kitchen cabinet, building um, a group of individuals that you could really turn to. And that was a safe space so that you could grow and learn. And there were a couple of women in tech that were there, and we had a casual conversation that none of us really had that. And to be honest, we were jealous. The men, they would go out, they would show up at conferences, they would go golf a day early. We were never invited. I just want to be like, that invitation was never extended. So there are 6 or 8 of us that said, let's start to get together. Let's start to have a conversation. Let's build this.
We'll have our own
So,
golf day.
pardon me?
We'll have our own golf day.
Exactly. I mean, like we chose wine. So
Hey,
we chose wine instead. So so we just kind of did our first meetup with just the 8 of us. And it took, I'll be honest, it took some time. And so about 2 years in, we were meeting quarterly or a little bit more frequently. Sometimes we'd get on the phone, sometimes we'd meet in person. But we created this informal way for us and safe space for us to ask questions among each other that you didn't necessarily want to throw out there on a major channel, but a safe space that you felt comfortable, that there was a high level of trust. Um, and we leveraged each other for career advice, sticky situations, technical advice, sponsorship of each other, insights into the industry that perhaps we could share among each other. And that's what we did. And we got so much benefit out of that that we thought this needed to be brought to the larger industry, that we knew other women within the community that were struggling with that, struggling to have a group of humans that they could really connect with and feel like they could trust, a cohort. So it started as a casual meetup. I mean, this has been 9 years plus in the making.
wow.
So it's this overnight success that hasn't been an overnight success. So it was initially just the 8 of us or whatever it was, and we started getting together. And then from there, a casual meetup. And it was like, let's throw the toe in the water. So can we borrow meeting space from somebody? Can we figure out a topic that we can talk about? What would be good? What would bring a community of people together to create that? And then how can we foster and facilitate those connections? Maybe not with us, maybe with us, but that we had a vehicle for other people to create what we had created among the 8 of us. And that was really what we did. And that was our moonshot. Like, can we do this?
Yeah.
So 2 years ago, we formalized. There was a groundswell of support from the industry, from sponsors, and from individuals. And it was clear that there was an appetite, that women needed a vehicle, um, an opportunity, and a regularity to meet, to have a conversation. And so 2 years ago, we formalized and became a 501(c)(3).
So official. Well, you just said so many things that I want to unpack that are just glorious nuggets talking about community. And one is that this is a 9-year overnight success, right?
Yes.
And talk to me a little bit about moving from meeting up a day early before conferences, starting with 9 of you with a conversation, borrowing meeting space, coming up with topics. What did that transition end up looking like from 9 people moving in person to wanting to expand this to a larger area? Because you can see here in the chat, like Barbara, yes, an amazing story about how a group grew out of a conversation. You went from meetups to a digital community.
Yes.
What was that evolution like? And what was maybe that deciding factor where you were like, we're on to something, this needs to be formalized? Like, what was that bulb moment where you were like, we're going to formalize this and make it a group?
Um, I, I'd like to say there was one, but it was more like breadcrumbs.
Okay.
Um, so one of our tenets is to really cast a wide net. We feel like there's an underrepresentation. Again, things had not been formalized. It wasn't fair that the 8 of us had the means, if you will. I mean,
Yeah.
because that's, the fact of the matter is we were more advanced in our career. We were able to have the financial means to be able to do that. To be frank, I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, as you all heard. When we started, they didn't even know I lived in Charlotte. So for me to make the personal, kind of the commitment to this group, I was flying up, spending time in Washington because it was still an in-person thing.
Yep.
So it was very clear there was an appetite, and we could see that the industry was changing. There were people in Chicago, people in other areas. But we knew that we needed to create a platform that didn't have as many barriers, because there was a direct barrier to having time and support or being able to chart your own path. And so we wanted to start to break down that barrier. So there were, to your point, there were a couple of moments. And our very first one was for ASAE Tech. We said, well, why not? We'd had a couple meetups, and we said, let's see if we can have a little reception. We're going to invite the boys, and we're going to see what happens. So the champions, something other than women, people who are supporting our larger ecosystem. We made one phone call and got a sponsor. One phone call. And that's all it was. And it was to High Road Solutions, Dave Caruso, and said, hey, Dave, we're thinking about doing this. Will you pick up the bar tab? Dave said, you bet I will. No problem. We probably had 50 people there.
Wow.
Had a couple more meetups. Then people started asking, you going to have the reception this year? So what are you guys going to do? Are you going to have everybody's going to meet before tech, right? You're going to do that. And so there was this buzz, there was an energy about it. People were asking, people were talking. It was coming up and collaborate. We were getting offline communications, and you could see it becoming kind of this groundswell. And so the second time it more than doubled. We got 2 sponsors. We made 2 phone calls, and that was it. It was like, we have no money. We're not formal. So how are we going to pay for this? But we want to be able to offer. Again, it was the whole idea of the democratization, the access for people to commune, for people to be able to create those connections without a barrier. Because going to some of these events is costly. You can't afford it. Not everybody can afford it. And associations don't necessarily have the budgets. So we were like, how do we break down this barrier that needed to be there? So it more than doubled the next year. So we just kind of saw this again. It was a groundswell. It was, when you go from one year to the next and more than double attendance, then that you're onto something. That there's an appetite. And that's really what happened. Is you could see people asked. So, I'd say sponsors, if you will. And we just call them friends because they're not sponsors. Our friends, I mean, it's a very low barrier. Again, democratization. Like, if you want to be a friend of AWTC, it's the same amount for all of our quote unquote friends, because we want to offer opportunities for small companies and large companies. So it's not just the large companies that they're getting their names out there. So that was what we were all about. And you could see that it was really resonating, and you could see that people were really, not just buying into it, but getting a return on that investment. And the other thing we were seeing is other communities, kind of breaking off. So, we'd been meeting for a year, and then now there's this side group of 5 or 6 women that are getting together, and they know each other, and they're starting to meet independently. That's when we knew we had something.
Absolutely. Look, and you even just had your 3rd phone call and your 3rd sponsor in the chat from Dana. So tune in for next year is what she says.
I love it.
So Dana, well, I think you just touched on a couple of things. One is the barrier to entry is huge when you're building community and building an organization like this, because we were talking earlier before we jumped on and went live about the geography of community. And I
Yeah,
think prior even to the pandemic, and even some people now still consider community your geographic, right? Like where you live, the people around you. You know,
mhm,
I'm a woman in tech and I don't necessarily always have the means or the time to fly to DC for an in-person meetup, right? So
correct.
I am probably one of probably a handful of women that live in Montana that work in tech or work in event tech or community tech, if you want to get really granular about this. And so that limits my opportunities of who I can connect with in my geographic community. And
Yes.
so I love when you're talking about expanding beyond just the 8 of you, expanding geographically beyond just the DC area. You know, you're in Charlotte, we're connecting here. And so, talk to me a little bit about that digital component to entry with AWTC. Was that a factor you thought about when you're thinking about expanding the reach, the barrier to entry to the
Mhm.
community, and how that evolved, bringing in digital options when people couldn't always be in person?
So I'm going to bring in a little bit of what I do for a living, if I can, because it definitely plays into this. So when we talk about digital transformation at a church, it's really from the inside out, and we're talking about helping organizations also evolve to being successful hybrid organizations. And that takes different processes and things that go along with that's a different level and different type of digital transformation. I've worked remotely for 17 years. And so I will say that I had in the forefront of my mind the entire time with AWTC and with other organizations the importance of breaking down the geographic barriers and having proximity bias to the acceleration and advancement of people's careers. Um, to be frank, part of the reason why I left ACS is I had hit my glass ceiling for moving back to the proximity of DC. And I didn't feel like me living in Charlotte after running a nearly, a multi-million dollar project, and I had proved that I could work remotely should be a barrier. So when I think about community, and so again, I worked 17 years ago. So think about it, we didn't have this. I wasn't
Right.
able to actually connect. I mean, it was much more expensive to have a video conference that goes along with this.
Which, by
So,
the way, sorry to interrupt you. I actually was on a actual conference call the other day, and it was the worst thing ever. I was like, "How did we do this for decades?" It was
oh,
awful. It was awful.
decades. I still have my speakerphone here on my desk. I mean,
Yeah,
so we did. I did. You know, so I did that successfully. So when I think about this, there are a couple of things that digital brings into the conversation and to the possibilities that we don't have. One, it breaks down your geographic barriers, which I absolutely do not believe. If you look at what's going on in work trends, the number one thing is flexibility, and that is not just in the standard 9 to 5, but it also is in geographic flexibility. So people are pushing that envelope, and they're going to be continuing to push that envelope. So we've got to take down the geographical barriers. Then we also have financial barriers. Again, people can't always get together in person. So there is a financial component of that that is not necessarily reasonable. And if we happen to go through a recession, that's even going to become more real. We're going to have to figure out how we're going to do more with less in terms of in person. Don't get me wrong, I love being in person. Human to human connection is essential.
yes.
However, what digital does is it allows for a it both can create and complements synchronous and asynchronous communication. And that's what I love. It allows you to take a synchronous opportunity like an in-person event and build asynchronous trust and asynchronous communication and asynchronous continuity either before or after. So you can meet online and then solidify the trust in person, strengthen it and then continue it, or vice versa. And that's what I love about digital. And I think it has to be an important community because people are looking for that stickiness. People are looking for um, diversity of thought, diversity of experience. We hear about the Washington, D.C. bubble all of the time. Like, what a great way to burst that bubble than to actually, commune with people that live outside. You're in Montana, people in Texas, people in California, that their meeting experiences, that those are different. So it was always, to get to your specific, which was always in the forefront of my mind that we were going to have to do something digital. But I will say that it was the pandemic that pushed AWTC into it. It was primarily an in-person meetup. And
Okay.
when the pandemic hit, it was well, how are we going to continue this? We'd had critical mass. We can't slow this train down. How do we continue it? And we just embraced the heck out of it. And that's what we did. And so we've been fully remote and digital for the last 2.5 years. And then we're just starting to sprinkle some in person as well. And it's amazing how that goes. But we really have to think about, I think, is, strategically moving forward when you're building something that has a stickiness component to it, that you've got a combination of synchronous and asynchronous, and how do those go together, and how do you complement them?
Absolutely. Well, don't tell the DMV people that we're bursting their bubble. That will probably crush their souls
I know
because
it probably would. Sorry, DMVers.
yeah, sorry, all of our DC friends. We still love you, but we're coming for your bubble.
That's
We're coming.
right.
And Barb, I saw your comment in here about breaking glass ceilings with your high heels. And I see that you don't wear them anymore. So we're gonna find you like a ice axe or a saw or
Well,
something.
can I
So
show them actually what I'm wearing if the audience is going to get a
yes,
laugh? So it's freezing in Charlotte today, and I am a walking glamour dope wearing my Christmas slippers because they were the only ones I could find. So
I need you to send them here because winter came in with a vengeance. It was like 40 degrees this morning and they're calling for snow. And I'm like, it's not even November yet, guys. Come on. Anyway, we totally digress. So back to digital transformation and glass ceilings. And we're talking all over the place here.
yeah.
So feel free to join us in the chat and the Q&A. We want to hear from you guys too. Chat's very lively. But thinking again about how you made digital part, like it took the pandemic to kind of nudge you
Yep.
guys into that jumping off the cliff, but you were very intentional
hmm
about digital and bringing that into the organization. What kind of goals did you put around that? What did asynchronous connections look like for your organization?
Well, again, I'm going to answer this in two ways. For AWTC, it was about a continuation of the conversation and creating an asynchronous safe space, that allowed people to ask the questions they wanted to ask, seek advice, um, share information, um, blow off steam, commune with others in a digital space. And that was important. So we're using Slack as kind of our right now, I'll be honest. So we are using a different um, uh, a different platform. But that's, we were very intentional about doing that, because it needed to happen. So we needed to create opportunities for individuals to be heard and to contribute. And that's what matters. You know, we hear it all the time of, like, when you volunteer, that you get more than you receive. It's like when you volunteer, it's like, oh yeah, it's all about them, but it's actually, you get so much more. And I think the community is the same way,
Right.
um, especially in the hybrid work. Again, I'm going to bring it back to that as well. When we're working hybrid, I firmly believe that, people have really relied on those connections within their workplace, to create that community. So I think now in these hybrid environments, what we're doing is we're embracing communities that are internal and external. So people are looking to external sources in different areas or channels in order to create that. And this just happens to be one of those. So we're creating that channel for people to advance their career, to give back, to seek advice. And it's been very intentional.
No, I love that. And I think you touch on a couple things. One, like there's neuroscience behind volunteering and
Yes.
gratitude and giving back and how that affects your life and how your brain works. Like there is actually science out there. Like I'll spare my nerdiness talk. I've read dozens of neuroscience books around gratitude and how giving back and volunteering, whether that's in your career industry, whether that's personal community, like geographic community volunteering, and just how much more joy your brain gets when you're able to
Absolutely.
provide that expertise. So I think there is science behind all of that. But the other thing you've touched on a couple times now is safe and vulnerable,
Hmm.
are words I've heard you use. And I think that is at the core of one, human connection, and
Yes.
two, where communities thrive. Because if I talk about this on our podcast, which is about building inclusive communities, which is exactly what you've done. And we talk a lot about how if you don't have that safe and vulnerable piece, do you really have a thriving community?
Hmm.
Because it's nice to be invited to the party. That's awesome. I
Right.
got the invite. That's great. That's in being first step of inclusive, inviting everyone. But if I don't feel comfortable going to the party, or I don't feel comfortable chatting with people or sharing about myself at that party, is it truly then a community and inclusive party, right? Like it's always nice to be invited, but I want to share my expertise. I want to be vulnerable with the community of like, I work in tech and I'm dealing with someone at work that is
Yes.
not getting it, or I need to vent, or whatever it is. That's part of having that really safe space and what makes the community thrive. So I love that you've hit on that. And the other piece that you've talked a little bit about that I'm going to formalize into words is the power of community when it comes to business and
Hmm.
achieving goals is that product can always be replicated, right? Like I can
Yes.
always go build this another piece of tech. I can go build another association that does the same thing or in the same space as you. But community and that safe and vulnerable space is so hard to replicate.
Right.
And so I think organizations thinking about community, like that's the secret sauce. Like those that already had thriving communities going into the pandemic are coming out stronger. Those
Right.
that are trying to create it now have already kind of lost the boat.
I completely agree with you. It's parallel to what we're saying, but one of my sayings is people move for money, they stay for management. Well, you could apply that to community because, you could call it culture, you can call it whatever you want, but within a business, to exactly to your point, anyone can build a widget. You cannot create a feeling of worthiness. You cannot, I mean, you either have it or you don't. You cannot, you can't manufacture trust. You can't manufacture vulnerability. You can't manufacture authenticity. Those are nurtured. Those are um, those are carefully cultivated over time. And I think that that is what is important. There are there are platforms and I would say arenas that I'm involved in that I would not ask the same sort of vulnerable question as I would in AWTC. Like our fundamental is a no judgment zone. And I had never built a server room 7 years ago, right? And all of a sudden I find myself building my first server room and I don't have a clue about things. I'm like, all right, I really do not know what I'm doing. I went to my safe space and said, I've never done this before, but that's a very vulnerable position for me. And I don't know if I should have admitted it on this call, but it was a very vulnerable moment for me. I've got all these software chops, but I didn't have the hardware chops. But people perceived me as having those. So to be able to very vulnerably go out and say, this is something I've never done before. And I really need, I need someone to like, I'm looking at this and I think this is bullshit, but I don't know. So can someone help me with this? And it was amazing because that was who I turned to. There was another tech channel that I could have turned to, but I
Sure.
didn't. And I didn't because it didn't have the same qualities of that safe community for me. And that was important because I was pretty
Yeah.
sure that I was going to be shamed in that other community that I didn't know this. So I've been willing to do it.
Oh, I love that. That's a great story. I'm trying to think of something I could admit that I'm not good at and just try to save you.
Oh, I got a list. I can pull out the book if you want me
Oh,
to. I've got a whole list
so
of things
many
I'm not good
hits.
at.
I actually, have this is probably something my next book plays well with others, and I, like, sent a note to it, and I was like, "Well, it's probably about time I should learn how to play nice with others." So, maybe that's my vulnerable moment of trying to be better working with people because 'cause I'm generally not very extroverted when it comes to things. So, when we have a question in the chat actually that kind of goes on what you talked about with coaching clients and thinking about culture and that safe space. So what are some of the cultural aspects of transforming digital and hybrid workspace? Like thinking about that culture and now that we're diversified in how we, reach people and work with people. And this could be even with the association space as well, working with your members, working with your coworkers or your employees. What
Mhm.
are some of those cultural coaching aspects that you help them realize and touch on?
Um, I think the first thing is actually developing kind of different sorts of listening skills. It is definitely an empathy first, human first culture. There are listening skills that are involved that allow you to have that really you have to work at developing a much higher level of emotional intelligence. We work with clients a lot on strength based coaching, so that we're really looking at, to your point, how do you complement versus, I have a friend who, and I love this, a friend who said, let's not make a C into an A, let's make that A into an A plus. And I love that. And I'm totally stealing it from her. But, we believe in that culturally. So when we think about what's going on from, the in the office, butts in seat, can see everything that's going on. You have no proximity bias. I mean, because everybody's there. It's a homogeneous environment. Everybody has the same stuff. That when we go to these more flexible environments, you are starting to look at, having to really develop out a higher level of emotional intelligence. Just like I said, you have to be curious and ask a lot of questions, versus feeling like everything um, is rigid. So you have to think about flexibility first, and then you have to be very strengths based. So there are lots of things that we go through when we start to work with clients, on those sorts of attributes. But I think at the root is that authenticity, and really using and really beginning to develop out emotional intelligence, especially at the manager level, especially at
Oh,
the manager level.
absolutely. And I think those soft skills are really what's going to separate the next generation of leaders. Like, you're going to college, and I think a lot of colleges now are teaching, how to do the job, how to get it done, but really not focusing as much on those soft skills. And I think that's really going to be the differentiator in leadership moving forward.
Oh, 100%. I mean, and that's, I'm going to take a little bit of a left turn, but I can say that that was the number one criticism of me when I first started in technology, is I didn't have a technology background. I didn't know the hardware. And I didn't know, I wasn't a programmer. So that was always a dig on me. Oh my gosh, she's not a programmer. I came up as a program manager, a project manager, and a business analyst. So that was kind of, I knew the business. Well, I was a translator. So, again, to get back to it, in this hybrid and work environment, especially in cultures and in the management side, you think about it and it's like a manager, what you've got to do is you've got to be a good translator. You've got the strategic vision of what you're going to do. So that's coming from senior leadership. And then your role is to help facilitate that throughout the organization. Again, and it gets right back to community. So how do you do that? How do you leverage it? How do you build little mini communities to get the work done? How do you build trust among smaller teams, and then also in broader context? Like, one thing that we're really working with organizations to do is to develop some of the kind of the looser connections that happen in an in-person environment. So that's something we're really keenly aware of. So when you're onboarding someone, you're not just getting interaction and exposure to just your direct colleagues, but how do you create those loose connections with someone in a different division, a different so that you have greater exposure to the larger picture. Those are things that we're concerned about. But as within the organization, I mean, you have to think of yourself as, you know, kind of a microcosm, and how are you building out these little work groups and these high trust environments in order to get the work done.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in the hybrid work environment and even in hybrid communities that have a digital aspect to them, some of those, human connection and fostering those connections have to be very intentional, because you're
Oh.
not just going to run into someone at the coffee pot or the copy machine or walking down the hallway to the bathroom like you would in a, traditional work setting that I think we're
Mhm,
kind of used to. So, I know here at Juno, we are very intentional, and I have weekly meetings and biweekly outreach with other team members, like other parts of the company where I maybe never would have interacted with HR or accounting or some of our
mhm.
developers. I don't live or work anywhere near them geographically. And
Yeah.
so we are very intentional about how we're fostering those connections, and even fostering the connections with our clients, because they're not geographically near us either. And so how are we using the digital tools at our fingertips to be very intentional with how we're engaging with each other?
And I love that, shame on me for not bringing up intentionality and it being nearly at that at time, and we're just talking about it, but that really is important. And what I if I were to think about kind of a when I think about digital strategy and community strategy and just strategy in terms of organizational development, or from the association space, kind of membership development, that stickiness that potentially you're looking at for the members. I think the way that digital can be used is for that continuous continuity thread. Um, the thing that the pandemic has done, which is great, is people love the flexibility of the pandemic. The fact that we're now, so many people have a greater flexibility. And I do think that's going to continue to be a trend. But there's also something very comforting in the pillars of a routine. And there's also something very, very comforting about that. And so what I think is interesting about the right sort of digital strategy, if you want to think about that, and creating a connective tissue. So, everybody thinks of digital strategy as, I need to put up a website, and, oh yeah, I need to have a great AMS and a great LMS, and I need to understand these platforms that we're working with. But I would challenge us to think about it differently, right? I challenge us to think about how are these actually being used to really create those experiences that we're looking for, and some of that longevity that we need. And I do think, we I think organizations are still grappling with it. They haven't quite figured it out. But how do we find that right balance between spontaneity, flexibility, as well as continuity and comfort? And I think those were all still kind of stumbling through a little bit. But that's where I think something like communities, is part of a component of a strategy of what are you doing to create that through line, that people feel a comfort to, that I know what it is, I know what it's going to be, it's familiar, it's comfortable. And I think that's a really important element.
Absolutely. And the one thing I tell our clients as they're starting to build their communities and we're doing some engagement strategy with them is consistency.
Hmm.
People have to know you're there for them. They want to feel part of the conversation. Bring them with the journey. Don't build this behind the scenes.
Yes.
Don't be the man behind the curtain. Bring them along with the journey. Like, they're more invested in that. They feel part of it, and they're more likely to be there because you've created that safe space. You created a space that they wanted and asked for,
Yeah.
as opposed to here's a thing, go join it, start connecting. Like, it's like having a reception. Like, I've never understood why we're like, here's a bunch of strangers, throw them in a room with alcohol and call it networking. Like, why have we always done that? And like, that's the most uncomfortable situation for me, to the point where like
Right.
I avoid receptions because I'm socially awkward. I'm not going to walk up to a stranger and be like, "Hi, I'm Megan. Here's what I do."
Right.
Like, never going to happen. And so
Yeah,
like
there's
shame on
nothing
them.
better than a facilitated conversation with a meaty topic. I mean, that's like there's learning in there. There's a nugget in there that you can what I think it allows people to do to is potentially, dare I say, passively engage until they have that level of comfort, until they want to actively engage. I think one of the biggest lessons learned, if you want to put it that way, in our 9-year overnight success has been that, I mean, it really did start with a group of 8. Had we felt like we had to have critical mass of 100 people, right out of the gate, I mean, we probably would have given up years ago. And there were moments it was like, well, only a handful of people showed up for that. And we're like, okay, well, what kind of connection did they make? And those were some of the stickiest connections, because
Was
you
it
were
the
able
right
to have
12
these,
people in the
right,
room?
these in-depth conversations, and you could really kind of, stand naked in the room, and it was fine. And so, we've got to think about how we're, using these opportunities and what is the true purpose. Because if what we're trying to do is create meaningful connections and opportunities for either growth or change or comfort, that may look different than just you know a KPI metric that says we have X amount of people. That's a very different sort of metric that is more difficult to measure.
I call them vanity metrics, and I'm not sure everybody loves that, but that's really what they are. Like,
Yeah,
that's great that you have 1,000 people in your community, but why are there only 3 posts, right? Is that KPI
correct.
really the right KPI for
Right.
that?
And maybe you need to not have 1,000 people. Maybe you need to have 10, 100 people communities. That is, again, something that they're connecting to authentically, that allows them to feel like they're both contributing as well as receiving.
No, absolutely love that. So with just a couple minutes left, you kind of hit on already on my last question, which was if there was one takeaway in your 9-year overnight success that you would want to share with people, maybe wanting to get involved or thinking about starting their own organization like this, what's that one piece of advice for a 9-year overnight success?
Um, I would say there's nothing more important than surrounding yourself with people that you really enjoy. That has been, and that you're truly doing it for, I'm going to call it, the right reasons. Um, it's not going to, a lot of things don't happen overnight. And so enjoying that journey with the people that you're on the journey with, I think really matters. And so that's what we've done. The people that originally started it or have become and still are some of my best friends. We were, some of them I was good friends before, some of them I actually didn't know. And those are the people who call me at 9 or 10 o'clock at night because they've got something, or at 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning, or I get the text that says, do you have 20 minutes? I've got a problem. And without a doubt, we all pick up the phone, or we all are always available for each other. And we can go months without talking, but if any of us gets that call out, we're always there for each other. So I think that would be is make sure that you're enjoying the journey, and you're enjoying the journey with the people that you're surrounded by.
I love that. I think the biggest thing to remember, and we've kind of touched on this, is at the end of the day, we're all humans, and that
Mhm.
human to human connection is really at the core of what we do. And tech is just the tool that we
Right.
use when we can't be together in
That's right.
person.
That's correct.
So, asking for a friend, where can we find your community? How do we get involved with AWTC? Where can we find you?
So we're at awtc.tech, and there is a form there that you can get involved. So just reach out to, or if you want to send me an email, Rebecca@achurchconsulting.com. I'm more than happy to give you all the information you need to get involved. But we've got meetups that are going on, and I should have it memorized, and I don't. Shame on me. But I know we have other opportunities. So sign up for one of our events, and you'll be on one of our mailings, and you can be invited into the community. So I will share you, it's not just an open community. So we want people to get involved. And so it does show a level of, you have to have a level of participation and interest. So we just don't say anyone can join, to your point of who cares if it's 1,000 people. So we do want to see that. And so once you start to get involved, then you can be involved in all the other elements and aspects that we have.
That's awesome. It looks like Barbara actually put the link in the chat for us. So thank you, Barbara. Everybody take a look at that. And Rebecca, what an incredible conversation. What a moonshot you guys went for, formalizing this organization into a full-fledged 501c3 during the pandemic. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. Congratulations on a great organization. And maybe that friend was me asking to get involved. So looking forward to staying in touch and being more involved. And I think you guys are doing great work. So congratulations on your moonshot.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye,
Thanks
everyone.
everyone for joining. Have a great day.